There is a woman in the Guinness World Records who holds a title that no human being will almost certainly ever come close to breaking. She gave birth 27 times. She had 69 children. She survived quadruplets, triplets, and twins, over and over again, in an era before hospitals, before anesthesia, before any of the medical tools that make childbirth survivable today. She did all of this in rural 18th century Russia, as a peasant serf with no rights, no recognized status, and almost no recorded identity of her own. History did not even bother to reliably preserve her first name. And yet what she endured, what her body survived, is so staggering that scientists, historians, and medical professionals are still debating how it was biologically possible centuries later. This is the story of Valentina Vassilyeva, the most prolific mother in all of recorded human history. To understand just how extraordinary Valentina's story is, you first need to understand the world she was born into. It was the early 1700s in Chuya, a small town in what is now the Ivanovo Oblast region of Russia. This was the era of the Russian Empire, a deeply feudalist society where peasants like Valentina were essentially the property of the land they worked. Serfs had no freedom of movement, no legal rights, and virtually no access to education or medical care. Life expectancy was short. Infant mortality was devastating. Women routinely died in childbirth. Having a large family was not just a personal choice, it was an economic survival strategy. More children meant more hands to work the land, more bodies to help the household survive the brutal Russian winters. But even by the extreme standards of that era, even in a time and place where large families were the absolute norm, what Valentina Vassilyeva achieved was something that no one around her had ever seen. Something that no one since has come close to matching. Between 1725 and 1765, a span of 40 years, Valentina gave birth 27 times. And here is where the numbers become genuinely difficult to process. She did not give birth to 27 children. She gave birth to 69. Because almost every single pregnancy produced multiple babies. 16 of her pregnancies were twins. 7 were triplets. And 4 separate times, she gave birth to quadruplets. Think about what that means for a moment. In an era when giving birth to a single healthy child was considered a triumph, this woman survived the delivery of 4 babies at once on 4 separate occasions. Her husband, Fyodor Vasilyev, was recorded as saying that 67 of those 69 children survived infancy, an astonishing survival rate for that era. Only 1 set of twins was lost. The rest lived. The first verified account of Valentina's story was not recorded during her lifetime. It came through the monastery of Nikolsk in February of 1782, the same year she died. The following year, the story appeared in a respected British publication called The Gentleman's Magazine, which quoted a letter from a correspondent in St. Petersburg describing the Vasilyev family in remarkable detail. The letter listed the exact breakdown of births, the twins, the triplets, the quadruplets, and noted that Fyodor Vasilyev himself, then aged 75, was said to be alive and in good health. The account was specific enough, and sourced closely enough to people who would have had direct contact with the family, that the Guinness Book of World Records eventually accepted it as the most credible record of its kind ever documented. Guinness themselves noted that while the story is statistically extraordinary, the contemporary sources are consistent enough to be taken seriously. Now, is there any scientific basis for how this was possible? Medical experts who have studied Valentina's case point to a rare but real condition called hyperovulation, where the ovaries release multiple eggs during a single cycle rather than just one. Women with hereditary hyperovulation are significantly more likely to conceive twins, triplets, and higher-order multiples naturally. It is entirely possible that Valentina carried a genetic predisposition to hyperovulation that was extreme even by the standards of that condition. This would not make her story less extraordinary, it would simply mean that her biology was as unusual as her history. A woman born with a body that, in the cruelest possible sense, was built to do exactly what she spent 40 years doing. Because it is important to be honest about what Valentina's life actually looked like, it was not a celebration. Being pregnant for the majority of 4 decades, in a peasant household in 18th century Russia, with no pain relief, no medical support, and no guarantee that you or your children would survive each delivery, was an experience of physical endurance that is almost beyond imagination. Childbirth in that era killed enormous numbers of women. Complications were common. Multiple births were even more dangerous. And yet Valentina went through it, 27 times, and lived to the age of 75. Her body bore more than most human beings across all of history have ever been asked to bear. And she carried it. Every single time. There is one more layer to this story that is worth sitting with. Despite holding a world record that has stood for over 2 centuries, despite being the most documented example of human reproductive endurance in all of history, Valentina Vassilyeva has almost no personal history recorded anywhere. We do not know what she looked like. We do not know what she thought about her life. We do not know if she was loved or lonely, proud or exhausted, or some complicated mixture of everything all at once. Even her first name is uncertain. Some historical sources refer to her differently, and the name Valentina itself was only attached to her records much later. She existed in history primarily as a number attached to her husband's name. Fyodor Vassilyeva's wife. The woman who had 69 children. A record. A statistic. But behind that record was a real human being who woke up every day in rural Russia, raised dozens of children in impossible conditions, survived things that would have broken almost anyone, and left behind a mark on history so extraordinary that centuries later people around the world are still struggling to believe it was real. It was real. She was real. And she deserved far more than a footnote. We cover the most mind-blowing true stories from around the world every single week. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because you will not want to miss what is coming next. See you in the next one.